December 19th, 2024, 4:47 p.m. Highway 89, 15 miles south of Browning, Montana.
The Subaru Outback hit the black ice at exactly 63 miles per hour. Julia Brennan had 1 second to register what was happening before the steering wheel became useless in her hands. The vehicle spun counterclockwise, tires shrieking against frozen asphalt, and for 3 weightless heartbeats she was sideways, then backwards, then sliding toward the guardrail that separated the highway from a 200-foot drop into Badger Creek Canyon. If you're someone who loves incredible true stories of survival and second chances, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment letting us know what time and which city you're watching from. Now, let's dive in. The impact was not violent. That's what Julia would remember later. It was almost gentle, the way the guardrail caught the rear bumper and held. The car stopped moving. The engine stalled. Silence dropped like a curtain. Julia sat frozen, hands still gripping the wheel, breath coming in sharp gasps that fogged the windshield. Her phone had flown from the cup holder and landed somewhere in the back seat. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Outside, the world was white and grey. Snow fell in thick curtains, erasing the road, the trees, the mountains beyond. Visibility was maybe 20 feet. The temperature gauge on the dashboard read 11 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. Julia tried to open her door. It wouldn't budge. The frame had bent just enough in the impact to jam the mechanism. She tried the passenger side. Same problem. She was trapped. Julia forced herself to think clearly. She was a veterinarian. She dealt with emergencies. Assess the situation. Prioritize. Act. She had half a tank of gas. She could run the engine for heat, but not constantly, or she'd risk carbon monoxide poisoning. She had a winter emergency kit in the trunk, but the trunk was smashed against the guardrail and inaccessible. Her phone was somewhere behind her seat, but when she finally found it, the screen was shattered and unresponsive. No phone. No way out. No one expecting her until tomorrow morning. The storm had come 6 hours earlier than forecasted, catching everyone off guard. Montana winters were brutal, but this season had been especially unforgiving. Julia turned the engine on, let the heat blast for 10 minutes, then turned it off to conserve fuel. The warmth faded quickly. She wrapped her coat tighter, pulled her knit hat down over her ears, and stared out at the falling snow. That's when the memories started coming. They always did when she was in Montana, when she drove these roads, when the cold pressed in close and reminded her of everything she'd lost. 10 years earlier, January 14th, 2014, Brennan Veterinary Clinic, Browning, Montana. Julia was 12 years old the first time she met the white wolf. She had been sitting on the examination table in her father's clinic, swinging her legs and reading a book about Arctic animals, when she heard the commotion outside. Raised voices. Her father, Dr. Marcus Brennan, shouting instructions. The clinic door burst open and 2 fish and wildlife officers carried in something wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. "Gunshot wound to the shoulder," one officer said, breathing hard. "Found her in a trap about 8 miles north. Some idiot poacher left her for dead." Marcus moved fast. "Julia, grab the emergency kit. Second cabinet, top shelf." Julia jumped down and ran. She'd been helping in her father's clinic since she was old enough to hold a bandage. Marcus Brennan was the only large animal vet within 50 miles, and he treated everything. Ranch horses, farm dogs, injured wildlife brought in by rangers. Julia had seen broken bones, infected wounds, animals hit by cars. But she'd never seen anything like this. The wolf pup was maybe 5 months old, small for her age, with fur so white it looked like fresh snow, even matted with blood. Her left shoulder had been torn open by a bullet that had missed her heart by inches. She was barely breathing, eyes half closed, body limp. "Is she going to die?" Julia whispered. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was already cutting away fur, exposing the wound, assessing damage. Not if I can help it. Julia, I need you to monitor her breathing, count her breaths per minute, and tell me if it drops below 6. For the next 3 hours, Julia sat beside that wolf pup, counting breaths, watching her father work with the kind of focused intensity that made him legendary in the veterinary community. Marcus Brennan could save animals that other vets would have euthanized. He had steady hands, encyclopedic knowledge, and something else. He cared, deeply, sometimes too much. He removed the bullet fragments, stitched the torn muscle, inserted a drain tube, administered antibiotics and pain medication. By midnight, the wolf's breathing had stabilized. She was going to survive. "What happens to her now?" Julia asked. "Fish and Wildlife will decide. If she recovers, she'll probably go to a sanctuary or a breeding program. Arctic wolves are critically endangered." "Can she stay here while she heals?" Marcus looked at his daughter, saw the hope in her eyes, and sighed. "Julia, you can't get attached. We're not keeping her. She's a wild animal." "I know," Julia said. But even as she said it, she was already running her fingers gently through the wolf's white fur, feeling the warmth returning to the small body, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing. Over the next 6 weeks, Julia spent every moment she could with the wolf. She helped change bandages, administered medication, prepared meals of raw meat mixed with supplements. The wolf, who Julia secretly named Frost, recovered faster than anyone expected. Within 3 weeks, she could walk. Within 5, she was running around the large outdoor enclosure Marcus had built behind the clinic. Frost was intelligent in ways that startled Julia. She learned her name, learned to come when called, learned the difference between Julia and everyone else. When Julia sat in the enclosure reading, Frost would lie beside her, head resting on Julia's lap. When Julia cried, missing her mother who had died 2 years earlier in a car accident, Frost would press her cold nose against Julia's cheek. "You're going to break your heart," Marcus warned one evening, watching Julia and Frost through the clinic window. "I know," Julia said, "but she needs me right now." "And what about when she doesn't need you anymore? What about when she's ready to go back to the wild?" Julia didn't answer. She couldn't. The call came in mid-March. Fish and Wildlife had found a suitable release location, a protected territory in the northern Rockies where a small wolf pack had been re-established. They would come for Frost in 3 days. Julia didn't sleep for those 3 nights. She spent every available hour with Frost, memorizing the way her fur felt, the sound of her soft, huffing breaths, the intelligence in her amber eyes. On the last evening, Marcus found Julia in the enclosure, arms wrapped around Frost, sobbing. "It's not fair," Julia whispered. "I saved her. Why can't she stay?" Marcus sat down beside his daughter. "Because saving her means giving her the life she's supposed to have. Wild, free, with her own kind. If we keep her, we're not saving her. We're just trapping her in a different way. But I'll never see her again." "Maybe not. Or maybe you will. Wild animals remember kindness, Julia. They remember who helped them." On March 18, 2014, Julia stood beside her father as Fish and Wildlife officers loaded Frost into a transport crate. The wolf looked back at Julia through the metal bars, made a soft whining sound that broke Julia's heart into pieces. Before they closed the truck door, Julia leaned in close. "Be safe, Frost. Be free. And if you ever need help, you know where to find me." The truck pulled away. Julia watched until it disappeared around the bend. She was 12 years old, and she had just learned one of life's hardest lessons. Sometimes loving something means letting it go, even when it destroys you. Marcus put his hand on her shoulder. "You did a good thing, sweetheart." Julia nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She wore a small silver necklace her father gave her that night, a charm shaped like a wolf's head. "So you never forget," Marcus said, "and so she never forgets you." December 19th, 2024, 5:30 p.m., Highway 89. Julia's breath came out in visible clouds now. The temperature inside the car had dropped to maybe 40 degrees. She turned the engine on again, let it run for 8 minutes, then shut it off. She was rationing fuel carefully, but she knew the math. At this rate, she had maybe 3 more heating cycles before the tank ran dry. After that, hypothermia would start within the hour. She tried to think clearly. No one knew she was here. She'd been driving back to Seattle after visiting Browning for the first time since her father's funeral 3 years ago. The grief had ambushed her at the cemetery, standing over Marcus Brennan's grave in the snow. She'd left earlier than planned, wanting to outrun the storm. Instead, she'd driven straight into it. The wind howled outside, rocking the car. Snow piled against the windows. Julia could no longer see the road, couldn't tell if other cars had passed. For all she knew, Highway 89 had been closed, and she was completely alone out here. She thought about Frost, wondered if the wolf had survived in the wild, wondered if she'd found a pack, had pups of her own, lived the life Julia and her father had hoped for her. It had been 10 years. Wolves lived maybe 12 years in the wild if they were lucky. Frost might not even be alive anymore. Julia closed her eyes. Exhaustion pressed down on her. She knew that was dangerous, knew falling asleep in this cold could be fatal. But her body was shutting down, conserving energy, preparing for the worst. She didn't hear the howl at first. It was distant, almost lost in the wind, but then it came again, closer, a long, mournful note that cut through the storm. Julia's eyes opened. She sat up, instantly alert. Wolves didn't typically hunt alone. They didn't usually approach vehicles. But this sound wasn't coming from deep in the forest. It was coming from nearby, very nearby. Julia wiped the fog from her window and pressed her face against the glass. At first she saw nothing but falling snow. Then a shape moved in the whiteness, massive and low to the ground, circling the car. Her breath caught. It was a wolf. But not just any wolf. Its fur was pure white, even against the snow. And there, on its left shoulder, was a distinctive scar, visible even through the thick winter coat. "Frost," Julia whispered. The wolf stopped moving, turned its head toward the car window. Their eyes met through the glass. 10 years, a decade. And somehow, impossibly, Frost had found her. But Julia's initial surge of hope faded as quickly as it came. What could one wolf do? She was still trapped in a car on the edge of a canyon, still freezing, still running out of time. The wolf moved closer, so close Julia could see her breath fogging the window from outside. Then Frost did something that made no sense at all. She turned away from the car and released a series of sharp, commanding barks. Julia heard movement. More shapes appeared in the snow. 3 of them, smaller than Frost, moving with youthful energy. Pups. Frost had brought her pups. Julia's mind reeled. Why? What could they possibly do? But then she saw it, saw what Frost was doing. The adult wolf had moved to the driver's side door and was using her paws to scrape away the snow that had piled against it. The pups joined in, digging with surprising efficiency, clearing the area around the vehicle. They were trying to help her escape, but the door was still jammed. Julia tried again, throwing her shoulder against it, but the frame was too badly bent. She couldn't get out. Frost seemed to understand. She stopped digging and paced for a moment, then made a decision. She moved to the front of the car, positioned herself between the vehicle and the canyon edge, and began digging into the snow there, creating a kind of barrier, a wall. The pups followed her lead. For 20 minutes, Julia watched in stunned silence as 4 white wolves worked together, building up snow and ice around the front of her car, reinforcing the guardrail, making sure the vehicle wouldn't slide any further. When they finished, Frost returned to Julia's window. The wolf sat down, perfectly still, and looked directly at her. The message was clear. I can't get you out, but I can keep you safe, and I won't leave you. Julia's eyes filled with tears. She pressed her palm against the glass. Frost pressed her nose to the same spot on the opposite side. "Thank you," Julia whispered. "Thank you for remembering." Night fell fast in Montana. By 6 p.m., Full darkness had arrived. The temperature outside dropped to -3 degrees. Inside the car, Julia's heating cycles were down to 1, maybe 2 more before the fuel ran out. She watched Frost and the 3 pups settle in a circle around the vehicle, their white forms barely visible against the snow. They weren't leaving, they were standing guard. Julia pulled her coat tighter, tried to stop shivering, and waited. For rescue, for morning, for whatever came next. But for the first time since the crash, she wasn't alone. And somehow, in this frozen wilderness, that made all the difference. The storm raged on through the night, but the wolves remained. Frost had traveled 10 years through time and countless miles through mountains to find the girl who had saved her life when she was dying on a clinic table. Now, it was her turn to return the favor. Whether Julia would survive until morning remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. Frost would not let her face this night alone. December 19th, 2024, 8:23 p.m., Highway 89. The last heating cycle ended at 8:15 p.m. Julia watched the temperature gauge drop from 52 degrees to 45, then to 38. Her breath came out in thick white clouds. Her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves 20 minutes ago. She flexed them constantly, trying to maintain circulation, but the cold was winning. Outside, the blizzard had intensified. Wind gusts rocked the Subaru on its precarious perch. Julia could hear the metal guardrail groaning under the strain. The wolves had moved closer to the vehicle, pressed against the doors and wheel wells, their body heat providing minimal insulation, but better than nothing. Frost remained at the driver's side window, her massive frame blocking some of the wind. The 3 pups, fully grown now but still young, maybe 2 years old, had positioned themselves strategically around the car. One at each rear wheel, one at the front passenger side. They weren't just keeping watch. They were using their bodies as windbreaks, as living barriers between Julia and the killing cold. Julia's mind was starting to drift. That was stage 1 hypothermia, she knew. The shivering had become violent now, uncontrollable. Her thoughts fragmented, jumped between past and present. She saw her father's face, young and smiling, teaching her how to stitch a wound on a practice dummy. She saw her mother, gone for 12 years now, braiding Julia's hair before school. She saw Frost as a tiny pup, barely alive, blood matting her white fur. A sharp bark snapped Julia back to the present. Frost was standing now, nose pressed against the window, eyes locked on Julia's face. The wolf could see her fading, could see hypothermia pulling her under. Frost began to dig again, furiously this time, scraping at the snow piled against the door. The pups joined immediately. They dug with desperate energy, creating a channel, trying to reach the door handle from outside. But even if they cleared the snow, Julia knew the door wouldn't open. The frame was bent. She'd tried a dozen times already. Then Frost did something extraordinary. She stopped digging and moved to the rear of the vehicle. She positioned herself against the back bumper and pushed. Her powerful legs drove into the snow, muscles straining. The car shifted slightly, maybe an inch, metal scraping against metal. The pups understood instantly. They joined their mother, 3 sets of jaws gripping the bumper, 4 sets of legs pushing. Slowly, incrementally, the Subaru began to move away from the guardrail. Not much, maybe 6 inches total, but enough. Enough that when Julia tried the driver's door again, throwing all her remaining strength against it, the door popped open with a shriek of protesting metal. Cold air rushed in like a physical blow. Julia gasped, the shock of -3 degrees stealing her breath. But she was out. She tumbled from the car into snow up to her thighs, and immediately her legs gave out. She collapsed forward, catching herself on her hands. Frost was there instantly, pressing against Julia's side, supporting her weight. The pups surrounded her, creating a circle of warmth and protection. Julia grabbed onto Frost's thick fur and pulled herself upright. Her legs shook violently. Her core temperature was dropping fast. "I can't," Julia managed through chattering teeth. "Can't walk. Too cold." Frost released a low whine, then made a decision. She lowered herself into the snow, lying flat, and looked at Julia expectantly. It took Julia's frozen brain a moment to understand. Frost was offering to carry her. Not on her back, wolves couldn't do that, but Julia could drape herself over Frost's body, use the wolf's warmth and strength to stay upright, to move. Julia wrapped her arms around Frost's neck and chest, pressing her face into the thick fur. Heat radiated from the wolf's body, glorious and life-saving. Frost rose slowly, carefully, bearing Julia's weight with surprising ease. The pups moved in close, one on each side and one behind, creating a mobile wall of warmth. And then they began to move. Not toward the road where no help was coming, but into the forest, into darkness, toward something Frost knew and Julia could only trust. December 19th, 2024, 9:47 p.m., somewhere in the Lewis and Clark National Forest. They traveled for over an hour. Julia had no sense of direction, no idea how far they'd gone. She existed in a small bubble of semi-consciousness, clinging to Frost, feeling the rhythmic movement of the wolf's gait, listening to the pups' soft vocalizations as they communicated with each other and their mother. The forest was impossibly dark. Snow continued to fall, but the tree canopy blocked the worst of it. Julia's boots dragged through deep drifts. Several times she nearly lost her grip, but each time Frost would pause, adjust, wait for Julia to secure her hold before continuing. Julia's mind drifted again, back to the clinic. Back to those 6 weeks with Frost. February 2014, Brennan Veterinary Clinic. "She's imprinted on you," Marcus had said one evening, watching Julia and Frost through the clinic window. "That's dangerous." "What do you mean?" Julia was 13 years old and thought she knew everything. Imprinting happens when a young animal bonds with the first creature that cares for it. Usually it's their mother. But Frost was barely conscious when we operated. You were the first thing she saw clearly when she woke up, the first voice she heard, the first touch she felt. To her, your family. "Is that bad?" Marcus had sighed. "It means she'll never fully integrate with a wild pack. It means she'll always remember you, always look for you. And that could get her killed if she approaches the wrong humans looking for that connection. Then maybe we shouldn't release her." "Julia," Marcus had turned to face his daughter, "we save animals so they can live the lives they're meant to live, not so we can keep them like pets. Frost is a wolf. She belongs in the wild, even if it's hard for us to let her go." Julia had understood intellectually, but emotionally, she was a grieving child who had lost her mother and was about to lose the creature that had filled some of that emptiness. The night before Frost was taken away, Julia had snuck out to the enclosure with a sleeping bag. She'd spent the entire night curled up against the young wolf, memorizing every detail. The way Frost's ears twitched in sleep, the soft huffing sounds she made, the absolute trust in the way she pressed against Julia's side. "I'll never forget you," Julia had whispered into white fur. "I promise. And if you ever need me, I'll find a way to help you. I swear it." Frost had opened one amber eye, looked at Julia, and placed a gentle paw on her hand. December 19th, 2024, 10:52 p.m. A sharp bark pulled Julia back to the present. They had arrived somewhere. Frost had stopped moving. Julia blinked, trying to focus. They were standing at the entrance to a cave. Not large, maybe 15 feet deep and 8 feet wide, but sheltered from the wind and snow. The floor was covered in dried leaves and moss, and in the back corner, Julia could see what looked like bedding, a depression in the organic matter where something large had clearly been sleeping regularly. This was Frost's den. She had brought Julia to her home. The pups entered first, shaking snow from their coats. Frost guided Julia inside, supporting her until they reached the bedding area. Julia collapsed onto it, her body finally giving up the fight to stay upright. The cave was warmer than outside, maybe 25 degrees, and protected from the wind, it felt tropical by comparison. Frost lay down beside Julia, curving her body around the trembling woman. The three pups settled in close, creating layers of warmth and fur. Within minutes, Julia could feel sensation returning to her fingers and toes. The shivering began to subside. "You saved my life," Julia whispered. "Again." Frost released a soft chuff and rested her head on Julia's shoulder, exactly the way she used to when she was a pup, recovering in the clinic. Julia's eyes grew heavy. She knew she shouldn't sleep, knew hypothermia could still kill her if her core temperature didn't stabilize, but exhaustion was overwhelming. Her last conscious thought was gratitude. Gratitude that Frost had remembered. Gratitude that love, once given, could echo across years and miles. Gratitude that she hadn't died alone on that highway. December 20th, 2024, 4:18 a.m. Julia woke to the sound of howling, not distress but communication. She opened her eyes slowly, disoriented. The cave was dark except for a faint grey light coming from the entrance. Dawn was maybe an hour away. Frost was gone. So were the pups. Julia sat up, panic fluttering in her chest. But then she heard them outside. Multiple voices, more than just four. Frost was communicating with other wolves. Julia forced herself to stand. Her legs were shaky but functional. Her core temperature had stabilized, thanks to the hours of shared body heat. She was alive. Against all odds, she was alive. She moved carefully to the cave entrance and looked out. The storm had passed. The sky was clearing, stars visible between retreating clouds. And in the small clearing in front of the den, Julia saw something that took her breath away. Frost stood in the center of a circle of 7 other wolves. Her pack. Grey wolves mostly, with 2 timber wolves and 1 that looked like a grey-black mix. They were all watching Frost, listening as she released a series of barks and howls that sounded almost like language. Then, as one, the entire pack turned to look at Julia. She froze. 9 wolves, 9 predators, each capable of killing her with ease. Her heart hammered in her chest. But none of them advanced. None of them showed aggression. They simply watched, waiting for something. Frost walked over to Julia and pressed her head against Julia's hip, the same gesture of affection she'd shown as a pup. Then, the white wolf looked back at her pack and released a single sharp bark. The meaning was clear. This human is under my protection. She is family. One by one, the other wolves lowered their heads in acknowledgement. Not submission, but acceptance. Julia Brennan, who had saved Frost's life 10 years ago, was now pack. Julia's eyes filled with tears. She sank to her knees in the snow and wrapped her arms around Frost's neck. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for remembering." Frost licked Julia's face, a gesture so familiar it made Julia laugh through her tears. But their reunion was interrupted by a sound that made every wolf in the clearing go rigid. A low, mechanical rumble, growing louder. A snowmobile, multiple snowmobiles, coming from the direction of the highway. Search and rescue. Someone had finally come looking for Julia's abandoned vehicle. Frost's pack melted into the forest instantly, vanishing like ghosts. But Frost remained, torn between instinct and loyalty. Julia could see the conflict in the wolf's eyes. "Go," Julia said firmly. "I'm okay now, they'll find me. You have to go, Frost. You can't let them see you." Frost hesitated. The snowmobile sounds grew louder, maybe a quarter-mile away now. "Please," Julia begged. "I can't lose you again. Go!" Finally, Frost turned and ran. Within seconds, she had disappeared into the trees, following her pack deeper into the wilderness. Julia watched until there was nothing to see, then started walking toward the sound of the snowmobiles, waving her arms, shouting for help. December 20th, 2024, 7:35 a.m. St. Vincent Regional Hospital, Billings, Montana. "You're incredibly lucky," the emergency room doctor said, checking Julia's vitals for the 3rd time. "Core temperature was 93 degrees when the paramedics found you. Another hour and we'd be having a very different conversation." Julia nodded, barely listening. She was wrapped in heated blankets, connected to an IV, being treated for stage 2 hypothermia and minor frostbite on 3 toes. But she was alive. The search and rescue team had found her 2 miles into the forest, walking toward the sound of their snowmobiles. Her story that she'd managed to get out of her car and sought shelter in a cave had been accepted without question. No one asked too many questions about how she'd traveled that far in sub-zero temperatures or how she'd survived the night. They were just glad to find her alive. Julia hadn't mentioned the wolves. Couldn't mention them. Not without putting Frost at risk. A nurse brought in Julia's belongings, recovered from the wrecked Subaru. Her phone was destroyed, but her wallet, her father's old journal, and her silver wolf necklace were intact. Julia held the necklace for a long moment, feeling the weight of it, remembering the day Marcus had given it to her. "So you never forget," he'd said. She hadn't forgotten, and neither had Frost. A sheriff's deputy came by to take a statement, standard procedure for any accident. Julia recounted the black ice, the spin, the crash. She left out everything that mattered. "Highway 89's been closed since 6 p.m. yesterday," the deputy said. "That stretch is notorious in winter. You're not the first person to slide off that curve, but you're one of the lucky ones who survived. Most don't." After the deputy left, Julia lay back against the pillows and closed her eyes. Her mind replayed the entire night. Frost's face appearing at her window. The wolves digging her out. The journey through the forest. The den. The pack accepting her. It defied logic. It defied everything she knew about wolf behavior and survival instincts. But it had happened. It was real, and it meant something she was still trying to process. The door opened. A woman in her mid-50s entered, wearing a Fish and Wildlife Services jacket. Julia's heart sank. "Ms. Brennan? I'm Agent Linda Cortez. I understand you had quite an ordeal last night." "I'm fine now, just ready to go home." Cortez pulled up a chair. "I'm sure you are. I just have a few questions. The search team reported finding unusual tracks around your vehicle and leading into the forest. Wolf tracks, a lot of them." Julia's mouth went dry. "I didn't see any wolves." "No, because the tracks suggest a pack of 8 to 10 animals circled your car multiple times, and there were dig marks around your driver's side door, like something tried to help you get out." "I don't know what to tell you. I was focused on surviving." Cortez studied Julia's face for a long moment. "Ms. Brennan, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know when someone's not telling me the whole story. And I also know your father was Marcus Brennan, the vet who treated dozens of injured wolves over his career, including one particular white Arctic wolf about 10 years ago." Julia said nothing. "That wolf was released into the northern Rockies. We've tracked her periodically. She's established a strong pack, had multiple litters. She's a survivor, smart, adaptive. Some of my colleagues call her Ghost because she's nearly impossible to photograph. Pure white, blends into the snow." Julia's hands tightened on the blanket. "Here's the thing," Cortez continued. "If that wolf helped you last night, if she remembered you from 10 years ago and somehow found you in that storm, that's one of the most remarkable wildlife stories I've ever encountered. And I'd love to document it. But I also understand why you wouldn't want to tell me. Because documentation means attention. Attention means photographers, researchers, tourists trying to find the famous wolf. And that could get her killed." Julia met the agent's eyes. "I didn't see any wolves." Cortez smiled slightly. "That's what I thought you'd say." She stood up. "For what it's worth, your secret's safe with me. Montana winters are brutal. Strange things happen. People survive against impossible odds. Who's to say why?" She paused at the door. "Your father was a good man. He saved a lot of animals most people would have given up on. Looks like one of them returned the favor." After Cortez left, Julia lay in the quiet hospital room, staring at the ceiling. Her phone was destroyed, but she asked a nurse to borrow a tablet and spent the next hour searching for information about white Arctic wolves in Montana. There wasn't much. A few blurry trail camera photos from 2019, a researcher's note about an unusually intelligent alpha female leading a mixed pack in the Lewis and Clark National Forest. No recent sightings, no location data, nothing that would help anyone find Frost. Good. That's how it should be. Julia would go home to Seattle tomorrow. She'd get a new phone, file an insurance claim, return to her veterinary practice. But she would never forget last night. Never forget the way Frost's amber eyes looked at her through the car window. Never forget the feeling of clinging to white fur in a blizzard, trusting a wolf to save her life. Some debts transcend species. Some bonds survive time and distance. Some promises, spoken in the darkness to a dying pup, echo forward through years until they become truth. Julia touched her wolf necklace and smiled. "We're even now, Frost," she whispered, "but I'll never stop hoping I see you again." Outside, somewhere in the vast Montana wilderness, a white wolf stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, her pack surrounding her, and released a single howl into the morning light. "Not goodbye, not yet. Just a reminder, I remember. I'm here. And if you ever need me again, I'll find you." March 8th, 2025, 11:42 a.m. Rainier Valley Veterinary Hospital, Seattle, Washington. Julia finished suturing the laceration on the golden retriever's front leg and stepped back, letting her assistant apply the bandage. 3 months had passed since Montana. 3 months since the night that had changed everything. She'd returned to Seattle in late December, thrown herself back into work, tried to resume her normal life. But nothing felt normal anymore. She'd wake at 3 a.m. from dreams of white fur and amber eyes. She'd find herself staring out her apartment window toward the distant mountains, wondering if Frost was out there somewhere, wondering if their paths would ever cross again. "Dr. Brennan?" Her receptionist, Monica, appeared in the doorway. "There's a call for you on line 2. Says it's urgent." Julia stripped off her surgical gloves. "Who is it?" "Agent Cortez, Fish and Wildlife Services." Julia's heart skipped. She took the call in her office, door closed. "Agent Cortez, is everything okay?" "That depends on your definition of okay." Cortez's voice was tight with stress. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Do you have any way of contacting the white wolf? The one that saved you?" "I told you I didn't see any—" "Dr. Brennan, please. I don't have time for this. 3 days ago, a pack of wolves attacked a ranch near Choteau, Montana, killed 12 sheep, injured 2 calves. The rancher, Frank Hastings, is demanding we authorize a hunt. He's got political connections, money, and he's making a lot of noise about dangerous predators threatening livestock." Julia's stomach tightened. "What does this have to do with—" The wolves left tracks. One of them was significantly larger than the others, with white fur caught on the fence wire. "Dr. Brennan, if this was your wolf, if she's leading a pack that's attacking livestock, I can't protect her. The hunting permit will be approved within 48 hours. "No!" Julia's voice came out, sharper than intended. "Frost wouldn't do that. She's never shown aggressive behavior toward livestock. Her pack hunts elk and deer, natural prey." "So you admit you know about her pack?" Julia closed her eyes. "What do you need from me?" "Come back to Montana. Help me investigate before the hunt begins. Because if I can't prove these attacks aren't typical wolf behavior, if I can't show there's something else going on, Hastings will have legal authority to kill every wolf in that territory, including yours." Julia looked at her schedule. She had surgeries booked through Friday, consultations for the following week. But none of that mattered. Not if Frost was in danger. "I'll be there tomorrow." March 9th, 2025, 3:17 p.m., Hastings Ranch, Choteau, Montana. The ranch spread across 1,200 acres of rolling grassland, backed by the Rocky Mountain front. Julia arrived to find Agent Cortez already there, examining the kill site with 2 other wildlife officers. Frank Hastings, a barrel-chested man in his 60s, stood nearby with his arms crossed, radiating hostility. "About time someone who knows wolves showed up," Hastings said when Cortez introduced Julia. "Though I don't need an expert to tell me what I already know." "Wolves killed my animals. Wolves need to be eliminated." Julia ignored him and walked to where the sheep carcasses had been laid out. Cortez had documented everything with photographs, but seeing it in person was different. 12 sheep, throats torn, bodies partially consumed. 2 calves with deep lacerations, but still alive, recovering in the barn. Julia knelt beside the nearest carcass, examining the bite patterns. Something was wrong. The wounds were messy, inefficient. Wolves were precise killers, especially experienced ones. They went for the throat, killed quickly, consumed methodically. This looked almost frenzied. "What's your professional opinion?" Cortez asked quietly. "This doesn't match wolf hunting behavior," Julia said. "The bite radius is too wide in some places, too narrow in others, like multiple different animals with different jaw sizes. And wolves don't kill this many prey animals at once unless they're starving. Even then, they'd cache the extra meat for later. These bodies were just left." Hastings overheard. "You calling me a liar?" "I'm saying something unusual happened here. May I see the white fur you found?" Cortez retrieved an evidence bag. Inside were several tufts of white fur, caught on the barbed wire fence. Julia examined them carefully. Her heart sank. The fur was the right color, the right texture. It could be Frost's. But then she noticed something. Mixed with the white fur were shorter, coarser black hairs. Wolves didn't have that type of fur. She pulled out her phone and took several close-up photos. "I need to send these to a colleague at the University of Washington," Julia said. "Someone who specializes in predator DNA analysis." "You have 36 hours, Cortez replied. "After that, the hunting permits get approved whether we have answers or not." Julia spent the rest of the afternoon documenting the scene, taking measurements, collecting samples. Hastings followed her around, making comments about city vets who don't understand ranch life and tree huggers who care more about wolves than people's livelihoods. She ignored him. But as the sun began to set, painting the mountains orange and purple, Julia felt a familiar sensation, the feeling of being watched. She turned slowly, scanning the tree line about 400 yards to the west. There, a flash of white, barely visible in the shadows. Frost was here, watching. And if Julia could see her, Hastings might too. Julia casually positioned herself between the rancher and the trees, blocking his sightline. When she glanced back toward the forest, Frost had vanished. That night, Julia stayed at a motel in Shoto, spreading her photographs and notes across the bed. She'd sent the fur samples to Dr. Rachel Kim at UW, a wildlife biologist she'd worked with on previous cases. Rachel had promised to fast-track the analysis, but results wouldn't come until morning. Julia couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the kill site in her mind. Something didn't add up. The pattern was wrong. The behavior was wrong. It felt staged. But why would anyone stage a wolf attack? At 2:37 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Meet me at Black Butte Trailhead, 5 a.m. Come alone. Bring first aid supplies. Linda Cortez." Julia stared at the message. Why would Cortez use an unknown number? And why meet before dawn at a remote trailhead? Unless it wasn't Cortez. Unless someone else had her phone. Julia grabbed her jacket and her father's old veterinary kit, still packed in her rental car from the trip. She didn't know what she was walking into, but if there was any chance Frost needed help, she had to go. March 10th, 2025, 5:03 a.m., Black Butte Trailhead. The parking area was empty when Julia arrived. Dawn was still 45 minutes away, the darkness complete except for her headlights. She grabbed her kit and a flashlight, then waited. A figure emerged from the trees. Not Cortez. A young man, maybe 25, wearing hiking gear and carrying a backpack. He approached cautiously, hands visible. "Dr. Brennan? I'm Tyler Morrison. I'm the one who texted you. Where's Agent Cortez?" "At the ranch, I assume. I needed to talk to you without anyone else hearing. My family has been ranching in this area for 4 generations. I know these mountains. I know the wolves. And I know what I saw 3 nights ago wasn't natural wolf behavior. Julia's hand moved to the pepper spray on her belt. Keep talking. My uncle is Frank Hastings. He's been trying to get hunting permits for years, claims wolves are destroying his livelihood. But his ranch turns a profit. Insurance covers livestock losses. This isn't about money, it's about control, about hating something wild he can't dominate. What did you see 3 nights ago? Tyler pulled out his phone, showed Julia a video. Night vision footage, grainy but clear enough. 4 wolves approaching the sheep pen, but they weren't hunting. They were being herded, driven toward the pen by something else. Something moving in the shadows behind them. What is that? Julia whispered. Dogs, trained hunting dogs. My uncle keeps 6 of them. They're mean, aggressive, barely socialized. I think he used them to drive the wolves toward his livestock, then released them into the pen to create carnage. The white wolf, the one everyone's talking about, she wasn't attacking. She was trying to lead her pack away from the dogs. Julia's blood ran cold. He framed them. I can't prove it. The video's not clear enough, and my uncle has friends in every government office in the county. But I know what I saw, and I know those dogs. One of them is half wolf, illegal hybrid. That's probably where some of the confusing bite marks came from. Why are you telling me this? Tyler met her eyes. Because I heard what that white wolf did for you last December, how she saved your life. And because killing animals for being what they are, just because we don't like them, is wrong. My family used to believe in coexisting with wildlife. My grandfather taught me that. But Uncle Frank, he's different, meaner, and he's going to get those wolves killed unless someone stops him. Julia thought quickly. The fur samples. If your uncle planted them, there should be dog DNA mixed in with the wolf fur. My colleague at UW is analyzing them now. Will it be enough? It has to be, Tyler nodded. There's something else you should know. Uncle Frank has hired 3 hunters. They're going into the Lewis and Clark forest tomorrow at dawn with tracking dogs. Even if the permits aren't officially approved yet, he's not waiting. He wants that white wolf dead, and he'll pay for it to happen. Can you tell me where they're planning to hunt? North sector, near 2 Medicine Creek. That's where the white wolf's den is supposed to be. But Dr. Brennan, these aren't ethical hunters. They're killers. They use illegal snares, poison bait, spotlight hunting at night. If they find that pack, they won't. Julia's voice was steel. Thank you for telling me. After Tyler left, Julia sat in her car and called the one person who might be able to help. Agent Cortez answered on the second ring, sounding exhausted. It's Julia Brennan. I need you to delay those hunting permits by 24 hours. I can't. Frank Hastings staged the attack, used his dogs to drive the wolves into the pen, then blamed them for the kills. I have a witness and DNA evidence being analyzed right now. Silence. Then, that's a serious accusation. I know, but if you authorize that hunt, innocent animals will die. Just give me 24 hours to prove it. Another long pause. I can delay 12 hours, that's it. If you don't have solid evidence by 5 p.m. today, the permits go through. Julia checked her watch. 5:24 a.m. She had less than 12 hours to prove Hastings was lying, protect Frost's pack, and stop 3 hunters who were already on their way into the wilderness. She started the car and headed north toward 2 Medicine Creek. She didn't have a plan, didn't have backup, didn't have authorization to interfere with a legal hunt, but she had something more important. She had a promise she'd made 10 years ago to a dying wolf pup, a promise that she would always help when help was needed. And Julia Brennan kept her promises. March 10th, 2025, 7:52 a.m. 2 Medicine Creek, Lewis and Clark National Forest. Julia found the hunters' trucks parked at the northern access road. 3 vehicles, Montana plates, gun racks visible through the rear windows. The men were already in the forest with their tracking dogs. Julia grabbed her pack and followed the trail into the trees. The snow was deep here, 3 feet in places, but the hunters had broken a path that was easy to follow. She could hear dogs barking in the distance, excited and aggressive, not the controlled barking of trained tracking animals, This was bloodlust. She moved as quickly as she could, but she wasn't a trained outdoorsman. The hunters had at least a 30-minute head start, and she had no idea where Frost's den was located, or if the pack was even in this area. Then she heard it. A wolf's howl, sharp and warning. Not distress, but alert, telling the pack to scatter, to run, to hide. Frost was here, and she knew danger was coming. Julia ran. Her lungs burned in the cold air. Her legs screamed with exertion. Branches caught her jacket. Snow filled her boots. She didn't care. She crashed through the forest toward the sound of the howl, toward the barking dogs, toward whatever was about to happen. She burst into a clearing just as 3 men raised their rifles. 50 yards ahead, 4 white wolves stood in defensive positions around a den entrance. Frost was in the center, her 3 pups flanking her. Behind them, smaller shapes moved in the shadows. More pups, younger ones, maybe 6 weeks old. This wasn't just Frost's pack. This was her family, her children. "No!" Julia screamed, running into the clearing with her arms raised. "Don't shoot!" The hunters spun toward her. One of them, a man in his 40s with a scarred face, lowered his rifle slightly. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This is a legal hunt. The permits haven't been approved yet. Agent Cortez from Fish and Wildlife is delaying approval pending investigation."
Hastings paid us to do a job. Papers or no papers, those wolves die today.
Julia positioned herself between the hunters and the wolves. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. Behind her, she could hear Frost's low growl, feel the tension in the air. The attack on Hastings's ranch was staged. He used his dogs to frame these wolves. DNA evidence will prove it. If you kill them now, you'll be murdering innocent animals, and Hastings will face fraud charges. You really want to be accessories to that? The lead hunter hesitated. His 2 companions exchanged glances. One of them pulled out a phone, checked for signal. "No bars out here. Can't verify anything she's saying." "So we wait," Julia said. 12 hours, that's all I'm asking. If I'm wrong, you can come back tomorrow with legal permits and do whatever Hastings paid you to do. But if I'm right, you'll be glad you didn't pull those triggers." The scarred hunter studied Julia for a long moment.
You're that vet.
"The one from the news. The wolf saved your life in December." "Yes." "That the same wolf?" He nodded toward Frost. "Yes." He lowered his rifle completely. "My daughter sent me that article. Said it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever read. Made her want to be a veterinarian like you." He looked at his companions. "We're leaving." "What about Hastings?" one of them protested. "He paid us half up front." "We'll return it. I'm not killing an animal that saved someone's life. That's not hunting. That's murder. Come on." The 3 men called off their dogs and started back toward the trucks. Julia stood frozen, barely able to believe what had just happened. As soon as the hunters disappeared into the trees, her legs gave out. She collapsed into the snow, shaking. Frost approached slowly. She nudged Julia's shoulder with her nose, the same gesture she'd used 10 years ago when Julia cried in her enclosure. Julia wrapped her arms around the wolf's neck and let the tears come. "I promised I'd protect you," Julia whispered. "I promised." Frost's 3 older pups approached cautiously, sniffing Julia with curiosity. From the den, smaller shapes emerged. 6 tiny wolf pups, maybe 6 weeks old, their eyes barely open. They tumbled over each other, unaware of how close they'd come to losing their mother. Julia sat in the snow, surrounded by Frost's family, and felt something shift inside her. She'd been drifting for 3 months, going through the motions of her life in Seattle, but never fully present. Now, sitting here in this clearing with these wolves, she felt anchored. Purpose found her again. Her phone buzzed. Dr. Rachel Kim. DNA analysis complete. Fur samples contain wolf, domestic dog, and wolf-dog hybrid DNA. Multiple animals. Consistent with staged attack scenario. Sending full report to Fish and Wildlife now. Julia showed Frost the phone screen as if the wolf could read it. "You're safe. The evidence clears you." Frost tilted her head, studied.
Julia's face then released a soft chuff that sounded almost like relief.
Julia stayed in the clearing for another hour, just being present with Frost and her family. The wolf seemed content to have her there, showing no urgency to leave. When Julia finally stood to head back, Frost walked with her to the edge of the clearing. They stood together in the snow, woman and wolf, two beings whose lives had intersected in impossible ways. Julia touched Frost's head gently. "I have to go back to Seattle, back to my life. But I'm not saying goodbye. Not really. Because I know now that we'll always find each other when it matters. Somehow. Some way." Frost pressed her head into Julia's hand one last time, then turned and ran back to her den, back to her pups, back to her wild life. Julia watched until the white form disappeared, then started the long walk back to civilization, back to phone calls with Agent Cortez, back to confronting Frank Hastings with evidence of his fraud. But this time, she walked with her head high. This time, she knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. Save those who couldn't save themselves, protect those who needed protection, honor the bond between human and animal that transcended logic and law, just like her father had taught her, just like Frost had reminded her. Some promises echo across years, some debts are repaid in ways we never expect, some love, once given, never dies. March 10th, 2025, 2:34 p.m., Teton County Sheriff's Office, Choteau, Montana. Frank Hastings sat across the interrogation table with his lawyer, a slick-looking man from Great Falls named Robert Carlson. Agent Cortez had laid out the evidence methodically, DNA analysis proving multiple domestic dog and wolf hybrid DNA mixed with wolf fur at the scene, Tyler Morrison's testimony about the trained hunting dogs, inconsistencies in the kill patterns, and Julia's expert analysis. "This is circumstantial at best," Carlson argued. "You can't prove my client
Deliberately staged anything."
"We can prove he filed a false report," Cortez replied. "We can prove his dogs were on the property the night of the attack, and we have testimony from a family member placing those dogs at the kill site." Hastings leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "That boy doesn't know what he saw. It was dark. He's always been soft about wildlife." Julia, sitting beside Cortez as a consulting expert, spoke for the first time. "Your nephew provided video evidence, night vision footage showing your dogs herding wolves toward the sheep pen. The timestamp matches the night of the attack." Hastings's face reddened. "You can't use that. He was trespassing on my property." "Actually," Sheriff Tom Bradley interjected from the doorway, "Tyler Morrison is part owner of that property. His grandfather left him 30% in his will. He had every right to be there, and every right to document what he saw." The lawyer whispered something to Hastings, who shook his head
Violently.
"No, I'm not admitting anything." Cortez slid a photograph across the table. "This is your dog, correct? The wolf hybrid you keep in the back kennel, the one that's not registered with the state as required by law for all wolf dog crosses." Hastings stared at the photo but said nothing. "Possession of an unregistered wolf hybrid is a federal offense, Mr. Hastings, as is filing false reports with Fish and Wildlife Services, as is attempting to authorize a hunt based on fraudulent evidence. You're looking at 3 felony charges and up to 8 years in federal prison." Carlson held up a hand. "Give us a moment to confer." They stepped out. Julia looked at Cortez. "Will the charges stick?" "If he fights it, maybe, maybe not. But the publicity alone will destroy him. Every rancher in Montana will know he lied about wolves to push his personal agenda. That matters more than jail time in this community." 20 minutes later, Carlson returned. "My client is willing to accept a
Plea agreement.
He'll surrender the wolf hybrid, pay restitution for the cost of the investigation, and withdraw his petition for hunting permits. In exchange, you reduce the charges to misdemeanors with probation." Cortez looked at Sheriff Bradley, who nodded slowly. "The permits are withdrawn permanently," Cortez said, "and if Mr. Hastings ever files another wildlife complaint, we'll investigate it with extreme prejudice. Those are my terms." "Agreed." Julia wanted to feel satisfaction. She wanted to feel like justice had been served. But all she felt was exhaustion. She'd saved Frost's pack, proven the wolves were innocent, but it had taken everything she had. As they left the sheriff's office, Cortez pulled Julia aside. "You did good work here. Exceptional work, actually. Have you ever considered doing this full-time?" "What do you mean?" "Wildlife investigation and advocacy. We need veterinarians who understand both the science and the politics. People who can bridge the gap between ranchers and conservationists. You have a gift for it." Julia hadn't considered it. Her practice in Seattle was successful, stable. But was it fulfilling? Had it been fulfilling before Montana? Before Frost? Before she remembered why she'd become a veterinarian in the first place? "I'll think about it," she said. March 11th, 2025, 6:48 a.m. 2 Medicine Creek. Julia returned to the clearing one last time before heading back to Seattle. She didn't expect to see Frost, didn't expect the wolves to still be there. They were wild animals. They moved with the seasons, followed the prey, lived on their own terms. But when she reached the clearing, Frost was waiting. The white wolf sat at the edge of the tree line, perfectly still, as if she'd known Julia would come. The morning sun caught her fur, making her glow like something out of a dream. Behind her, visible in the shadows, were her 3 older pups and the 6 younger ones, all watching with curious amber eyes. Julia approached slowly. Frost stood, but didn't retreat. They met in the center of the clearing, woman and wolf, 2 beings bound by a decade of impossible connection. Julia knelt in the snow. "I have to go home now, back to my life, whatever that looks like. But I wanted to see you one more time, wanted to say thank you, for saving me, for trusting me, for remembering." Frost moved closer, pressed her massive head against Julia's chest. The gesture was so tender, so deliberate, that Julia's eyes filled with tears. She wrapped her arms around the wolf's neck, buried her face in white fur, and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back for 3 months. The grief over her father's death, the loneliness of her life in Seattle, the sense that she'd been drifting, going through motions, existing but not living. And underneath it all, the realization that this wolf, this wild creature, had given her back something she'd lost: purpose.
"I don't know when I'll see you again," Julia whispered.
"I don't know if I'll see you again, but I'll never forget you, I promise." Frost pulled back slightly and looked directly into Julia's eyes. The intelligence there was staggering, almost unsettling. It was the look of a creature that understood more than it should, that saw deeper than most humans ever could. Then, Frost did something Julia would never forget. The wolf turned and barked once, sharp and commanding. From the trees, the 3 older pups approached, but they didn't stop at Frost's side. They came directly to Julia, circling her, sniffing her hands, her jacket, her boots, learning her scent, memorizing her. Frost was teaching them that this human was safe, that this human was family, that if they ever encountered Julia Brennan in the wild, they should remember her the way Frost had remembered. Julia's breath caught. "You're showing them who I am." Frost released a soft chuff that sounded almost like confirmation. After several minutes, the pups returned to their mother. Frost gave Julia one last long look, then turned and led her family into the forest. Julia watched until the last flash of white disappeared among the trees. She stood alone in the clearing for a long time, feeling the weight of the moment, feeling the certainty that her life had just changed in ways she couldn't yet fully understand. June 15th, 2025, 9:23 a.m. Northern Rockies Wildlife Recovery Center, Kalispell, Montana. Julia signed the final papers and accepted the keys from the previous director, a woman named Catherine Wells, who was retiring after 30 years of service. "The facility's in good shape," Catherine said, walking Julia through the main building. "We've got space for up to 40 animals at capacity, surgical suite, quarantine area, rehabilitation enclosures. Funding's always tight, but we manage." Julia nodded, taking it all in. 3 months ago, she'd sold her practice in Seattle, packed up her
apartment and moved back to Montana. Agent Cortez had helped her secure the director position at this non-profit recovery center. It was a pay cut, longer hours, and far less prestigious than her Seattle practice. It was also exactly where she needed to be. "Any advice?" Julia asked. Catherine smiled. "You'll get calls at 3 a.m. about injured animals. You'll deal with bureaucrats who don't understand wildlife. You'll break your heart over the ones you can't save. But every animal you release back into the wild will make it all worth it." After Catherine left, Julia stood in the empty surgical suite and thought about her father. Marcus Brennan had dedicated his life to saving animals most people would have given up on. He'd taught Julia that every life mattered, that intelligence and compassion weren't limited to humans, that the wild things of the world deserved advocates. She pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she'd taken that last morning in the clearing. Frost, surrounded by her family, looking back at the camera with those impossibly intelligent amber eyes. Julia had it printed and framed. It now hung on her office wall with a small plaque underneath. "Some promises echo across years, some bonds transcend species, some love, once given, never dies." Her first patient arrived that afternoon, a young elk with a broken leg, brought in by rangers. Julia examined it, planned the surgery, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Peace, purpose, the sense that she was finally living the life she was meant to live. December 18th, 2025, 4:15 p.m., Northern Rockies Wildlife Recovery Center. 9 months had passed. Julia had treated over 150 animals: bears, elk, mountain lions, eagles, and yes, wolves. 3 of them, actually. None of them Frost, but each one reminded her of that white wolf and the debt that had been repaid in a Montana blizzard. She was preparing to close the center for the evening when she heard a vehicle pull up outside. Through the window, she saw Agent Cortez getting out of her truck, and she wasn't alone. A young boy, maybe 11 years old, sat in the passenger seat. Julia met them at the door. "Linda, what's wrong?" "I need a favor, a big one." Cortez glanced back at the truck. "That's my nephew, Danny. He's been living with me since my sister died last year. Cancer. He's been struggling, stopped talking to his therapist, won't engage with other kids. Classic trauma response." "I'm sorry, but I'm a veterinarian, not a—" "I know, but I remember what you told me about Frost, about how caring for her helped you process your mother's death. I was hoping maybe Danny could volunteer here, help with the animals. Sometimes healing comes from helping others heal." Julia looked at the boy in the truck. He stared straight ahead, arms crossed, face closed off. She saw herself at that age, after her mother died, when the world felt too big and too painful, and nothing made sense. "Bring him in." Over the next 3 weeks, Danny came to the center every day after school. He was quiet at first, barely speaking, but he worked hard. He cleaned enclosures, prepared food, assisted with basic medical care. And slowly, incrementally, something shifted. Julia watched him with the injured animals and saw the same thing her father must have seen in her all those years ago. A child learning that caring for something else could ease their own pain. That gentleness and compassion were strengths, not weaknesses. That healing was possible even when it felt impossible. On December 19th, exactly 1 year after the night Frost had saved her life, Julia took Danny out to the rehabilitation enclosure where they were preparing a young wolf for release. The animal had been hit by a car, treated, and was now fully recovered. "Tomorrow we're releasing her back into the Lewis and Clark forest," Julia said. "She'll find a pack, learn to hunt, live the life she's supposed to live."
Danny watched the wolf pace the enclosure. "Do you think she'll remember us after we let her go?" Julia thought about Frost, about amber eyes recognizing her through a car window, about a debt repaid across 10 years and impossible odds. "I think animals remember more than we give them credit for," she said. "I think kindness leaves a mark that doesn't fade. And I think sometimes, when we need it most, they remember and come back." Danny nodded slowly. "Can I come to the release tomorrow?" "I'd like that." That night, Julia stayed late at the center, catching up on paperwork. Around 10 p.m. she heard something outside. Not threatening, just present. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. At the edge of the clearing, illuminated by moonlight, stood a white wolf. Frost. She wasn't alone. Her 3 older pups, now fully grown, flanked her. And behind them, barely visible, were the 6 younger ones from last March, now adolescents, all watching the building with curious eyes. Julia's heart stopped. She hadn't seen Frost since that morning in 2 Medicine Creek 9 months ago. Hadn't expected to see her again. But here she was, standing in the snow like a ghost, like a miracle. Julia stepped off the porch slowly. Frost didn't retreat. They met halfway, woman and wolf, and Julia sank to her knees in the snow. "You came back," Julia whispered. Frost pressed her nose to Julia's face, then her neck, then her stomach. The wolf paused there, sniffing intently, and released a soft whine that sounded almost curious. Julia's hand moved to her abdomen unconsciously. She'd missed her period last month, but had attributed it to stress. Hadn't taken a test yet. Hadn't let herself hope for something she'd thought might never happen. But Frost knew. Somehow, impossibly, the wolf knew. "I don't know yet," Julia said. "Maybe. I haven't confirmed it." Frost looked at Julia with those amber eyes, and Julia could have sworn the wolf was pleased. Protective. The same way she'd been protective of her own pups. They sat together in the snow for 20 minutes, Julia's hand resting on Frost's head, the pack surrounding them like sentinels. No words needed, just presence, just connection, just the understanding that passed between 2 beings who had saved each other in ways that transcended explanation. Finally, Frost stood. She touched her nose to Julia's hand one last time, then turned and led her family back into the forest. Julia watched until they vanished, then looked down at her hands, at the life she'd built, at the center her father would have been proud of. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that everything had led to this moment. Every choice, every loss, every act of kindness had brought her here, to this place, to this purpose, to this impossible bond with a white wolf who remembered. March 18th, 2026, Northern Rockies Wildlife Recovery Center. Julia stood in her father's old veterinary clinic, now converted into an extension of the recovery center. She'd purchased it 6 months ago when it came up for sale, unable to let it fall into other hands. The examination table where she'd first met Frost was still there, worn but functional. She was 4 months pregnant now, confirmed and undeniable. The ultrasound photos were tucked in her desk drawer. A girl. Due in July. She'd already picked a name, Hope. Danny was outside with 3 other volunteer teenagers, preparing food for the animals. He smiled now, laughed even. He'd found his purpose the same way Julia had, the same way her father had. By caring for creatures that couldn't speak, but communicated in ways that mattered more than words. Julia was sorting through a box of her father's old belongings when she found it. A journal she'd never seen before, leather-bound and worn, dated from 2014. The year he'd treated Frost. She opened it curiously and began to read. January 14th, 2014. Treated a white Arctic wolf today. Gunshot wound, critical condition. Julia assisted. She's already attached to the animal. I need to be careful about that. But there's something unusual about this wolf. Her microchip traces back to a breeding program in Alaska that closed 3 years ago. According to records, this animal should have been transferred to a sanctuary in 2011, but there's no record of her arrival. More concerning, I found scarring on her left shoulder from a previous injury. Old surgical scars, professional work, the kind of precision only a skilled veterinarian would produce. I made some calls, checked records, and I found something that doesn't make sense. In 1998, before Julia was born, I treated an injured Arctic wolf pup at this same clinic. Female, white, gunshot wound to the shoulder, almost identical injuries to the wolf we treated today. That wolf was released into the wild in early 1999. I kept tissue samples from that 1998 case. Standard practice. I've compared them to samples from today's wolf. They're genetically related, mother and daughter most likely, which means the
wolf Julia saved today is the descendant of the wolf I saved 16 years ago. A legacy of rescue spanning generations, a debt being paid forward through bloodlines. But there's something else, something I can't explain scientifically. When I looked into this wolf's eyes today, I felt like she recognized me. Not as a stranger who was helping her, but as someone she'd been told about. Someone her mother had taught her to trust. Is it possible that wolves pass down more than just genetics? That they teach their young about specific humans who showed them kindness? That memory and gratitude can echo across generations? I don't know, but I'll be watching this wolf carefully. And I'll teach Julia to watch too. Because I think we've just become part of something bigger than we understand. A bond between species that transcends individual lifetimes. If this wolf survives and has pups of her own, they'll carry forward the memory of our family. The Brennans, who save wolves. And maybe, someday, those pups will return the favor when one of us needs it most. I hope Julia never faces that situation. But if she does, I hope this wolf remembers. I hope the debt continues forward, the way all the best things in life do. That's what legacy means. Not what we do once, but what echoes forward long after we're gone. Julia closed the journal with trembling hands. Tears streamed down her face. Her father had known, had suspected that Frost was special, that their family's bond with white wolves went deeper than anyone realized. She looked at the ultrasound photo on her desk. Hope. The next generation. And she wondered if someday her daughter would meet Frost's grandchildren in a Montana forest and continue a legacy that had started before either of them were born. A legacy of kindness, of rescue, of the understanding that some bonds transcend time, species, and even death itself. Outside, the Montana sun set over the mountains, painting the snow orange and gold. And somewhere in those mountains, a white wolf stood on a ridge with her family, howling into the twilight. Not goodbye, never goodbye, just a promise. We remember, we'll always remember, and when you need us, we'll come. Because that's what family does, even when that family has 4 legs, white fur, and amber eyes that see deeper than most humans ever will.